and open up on Photoshop any image that you are willing to play with. For this tutorial, I want to show you a couple of quick ways to process an image. I want to be very careful with our language. When we talk about editing photos, that in the photo world is considered when a photographer takes 220 photos and edits the collection down to 10 or 15 photos. That's when real photographers or professional photographers use the word edit. When we apply different treatments to a photograph, let's say making it black or white, adding grain, adding a vignette where the corners are darker, we are going to call that processing. Okay, so today I have a photo here that I'm going to show you how to very quickly process into black and white. You will realize there are always more than one way to do everything. So I'm going to show you 3 different ways, and then it's really up to you to do what you feel best. So notice I do have my 2 panels open that I should always have open. That's history and layers. And go ahead and make sure that your toolbar is open. Quick review, if it's not open, you can access any of those options by going to Window. Okay, so the first thing I do when I open an image is I want to check the levels. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to go Image, Adjustments, and you'll see that almost everything I want to do today is in this panel. Okay, the first thing I want you to do is click on Levels and open up this panel. And then slide it over so you can still see your picture. Okay, what we have here is a diagram or a histogram which represents the dark and light data in our image. Okay, in a good solidly composed or solidly exposed image, you should have a really nice arc of data. Okay, where you don't have it all on one side or the other. Now in this case, this image has already been treated, so it's probably not the best example. But sometimes you'll open an image and you'll see that the data doesn't quite reach the dark or light ends. So for sake of example, I'm going to go ahead and open another file. And here's the file I'm going to open. What do you notice about the extension here, this .cr2? What does that mean? It's a raw file. So eventually we're going to be shooting raw. And look what happens when I open it. It gets automatically sent to camera raw 8.5. I could do adjustments here, and you can see I have another color histogram here. I'm just going to say open image for sake of example. Okay, so in this image, I'm going to do the same thing. Image, adjustments, and I'm going to open up my levels. Look at my data here. The highest concentration of data is in the darker portion, which should really be no surprise as you guys can barely see that image, right? Now remember, on my screen it looks a lot better than it does on the projection. So the first thing I do with my levels is I move these sliders. You have a dark slider, a gray slider, and a light slider. I'm going to move that so that it meets where the data starts. That's just my own way of doing things. I prefer to start with my sliders touching my data. So go ahead and do that if you can. And click OK. You'll see a slight change in your output. Then I'm going to go back and adjust a little more. Now, what I like to do is I'd like to bring up some of this data and get it to be a little lighter. So play around with your middle slider and see what it does. So you can totally change how you see your image. Okay? And sometimes that's not ideal. Sometimes that's not what you would want, right? Okay, now again, this is not the best example of an image, but I want to show you that you have 3 color pickers over here on the right. You have a dark color picker, and if you hover your mouse over it, says sample an image to set black point. So you get to say, okay, in my image, I want the black to be here, and I want the white, by selecting the white picker, to be here. So in this case, the really only white part of her image here is probably her teeth. So I'm going to really zoom in first of all, and I'm going to say, let's go ahead and make this really bright pixel here white. And look what it does. It brightens it just a little bit. Now, that's actually not to my liking. And what it does is when you see this lined mess in your histogram, that says you've lost your color data. You don't have sufficient color data. Okay? So go ahead and play with that and see what it does to your image. Sometimes it works beautifully, and sometimes it can hurt you. It's also fun, right, for sake of exploration, because that's really what today is It's really fun to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to take my white color picker and then pick something that's not white. Pick something that's middle of the road and go, whoa, whoa, look what it does. Okay? So that's an example of how you have these tools to really make your pictures do a lot of different things. Okay, so once you've played around, you should notice in your history panel that you now have the opening of your image, and you have a note that says levels if you didn't press cancel. So go back to your original image by clicking up at the top. And I have a menu open somewhere. Okay. So I need to press escape. Okay, so when you're at history, you should be able to move back a step and go back to your original opening image. Okay? All right, so first thing I always do is I always play with my levels. Now, let's talk about mimicking the style of processing in some of your favorite photographers. Go back to image, hit adjustments, and let's go down to the second chunk of color management here. You have vibrance, hue saturation, color balance, black and white, photo filter, channel mixer, and color lookup. For this assignment, we're just doing a very quick sort of skimming of the surface of Photoshop. So go ahead and just turn your color or select black and white and see what happens. You get this menu, right? Okay. If you slide it over, you'll see that, whoa, it took away all the color from your image. Okay. Play with the red slider and see how adjusting the red slider can change the contrast of your image. This would be like a red filter in black and white photography, which we'll talk about later. Okay. So one way to change your black and whites are to use the black and white setting, and then you can control the sort of different color filters that you would add to your image. And you can press OK, or you can go back to start. So that's one way. Again, that was image, adjustments, black and white. For the record, that's not how I ever do it. I never do it that way, ever. Okay? I prefer to go to image, adjustments, and then I go to hue and saturation. So let's open up that panel and slide it over so you can see your image. This takes us back to the very first week of school where we talked for a second about the difference between shades of color, different colors themselves, and then the amount of color or value. So a hue slider is actually going to change the output of color in your image. So this girl with the flower in her hair, right, it was red, but now I can make it so it's almost yellow. Okay? Okay, I'm just going to set this back to 0. When I take an image and make it black and white, I desaturate it, which means I'm taking out the amount of color. Right? Saturation controls the amount of color. So I can have a ton of color, or I can take it out completely. This is how I like to make my images black and white. I then go back to image, adjust, and I always stick to my levels. Okay? So I would probably do something like this, bring up my blacks. And to be frank, I rarely do my photo editing in Photoshop anymore. So I'll show you that in Lightroom as we go. Okay. Okay, the last thing I want to go over today, and I'm going to go back to my original image to do so, is I want to show you a couple of things that will really get you excited about Photoshop. And again, this is just skimming the surface of what we're going to do this year. But I want you to look at your toolbar, and I want you to select the Quick Selection tool. The shortcut is W. If you hover your mouse over any of the tools, you'll see it tells you what it does. It also gives you the shortcut. If I select the Quick Select tool, and I'm going to zoom in here, I can do things like just select the flower in this girl's hair. Okay? Look how easy that is. Okay. I can then do really cliche things with that. I can just edit the flower. I could say image, adjust, hue and saturation. I can change the color of the flower. Okay? Or I could even get more exciting by inverting my selection, which means selecting everything around it. So I go up to select and I select the inverse, noticing that my shortcut is Shift-Command-I. And now I could just desaturate that part of the image. A lot of people love to do this. It's become sort of cliche over the years to have that black and white image with just a little bit of color. But it's fun to play around with. Okay, so just for sake of the display, I'm going to brighten this up quite a bit. Okay, some great questions involve how to access your toolbar. And this will be an activity that you do on Friday. When you look at your toolbar, if you look super closely, you will see that many of the tools have a little tiny triangle in the bottom right corner. That means that there are more tools underneath that top selection. If you don't see quick selection, you probably see the magic wand. Is that correct? So that means because there's that little arrow there, which is even harder to see because the magic wand kind of looks like it's poking the arrow, if you hold down the magic wand, you'll access the quick selection tool. Okay? So these dancing ants, I like to call them, or marching ants, are always created by selecting something on your screen. What happens is now I have to deselect them to move forward. Okay? Anything that I do now will only apply to that selection. Okay? So I'm going to press select, deselect. And again, I'm all about my shortcuts here, so I just know that that's Command D. Okay, I'm going to stop here for today just so that you can now tinker with those few things. And, oh, actually, no, I lied. I'm going to show you one more thing. A lot of you are going to want to add grain or texture to your image to give it sort of an older look like many of your photographers have. So for that, you will go to Filter, and you will look at the option to add noise. When you do that, it allows you to, first of all, zoom out and see your whole picture, and then you can add noise so that it adds like the look of grain. Okay? Now, notice right away, when I add this noise, I can see some color pixels in there. So I want to make sure I'm adding monochromatic noise that doesn't have any color in it so that I don't have to go back and resaturate my image. Okay? This is sometimes, for this project, what people love to do just to make it look like it's more like their photographer. It's not so crisp and clear, right? Because most of your photographers were shooting film. Okay. So to review, we went over how to desaturate an image or make it black and white. We went over how to select certain portions to apply effects just to that portion. And then we also went over how to add noise.